Adama Richards was the kind of woman who made a room feel warmer just by walking into it. She had a smile that curved slowly, like it meant something every single time. Her husband, Nathaniel, used to say that smile was the first thing he fell in love with. They had been married for 6 years when she traveled to Anambra to see her parents. It was the kind of visit that stretches. A week becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, because her mother had been unwell, and Adama could not bring herself to leave until she was sure the woman was strong again. She cleaned the house, cooked soups that would last, sat beside her mother on the veranda in the evenings, and listened to the old woman talk about everything and nothing. It was during one of those evenings that her mother's neighbor brought a young girl to the compound and placed her hands in Adama's. The girl's name was Chisom. She was 21 years old, thin as a reed, with sad eyes that had already seen too much poverty. Her mother had died the previous Harmattan, her father drank everything they owned, and she had dropped out of school in JSS 2 because there was no money. She stood there in front of Adama with a small polythene bag containing all she owned and looked at the ground. Adama looked at this girl and felt something open in her chest. She is a good girl, the neighbor said. Sharp and hardworking. Just help her. She has nobody. Adama called Nathaniel that same evening. He picked on the first ring the way he always did when she was away because his house felt hollow without her. Ada, said Adama, there is a young girl here, Chisom. She has no one, Nathaniel. Her story will break your heart. Ada, we have talked about this before. She will help in the house. I will train her, take her back to school. She just needs a chance, please. There was a long silence on the other end. Adama could hear her husband breathing, thinking. You have already decided, he finally said. It was not an accusation. He knew his wife. Adama said, she reminds me of myself at that age, quietly. If nobody had helped me, I don't know where I would be. Nathaniel said yes, the way he always said yes to Adama when her voice carried that particular weight. He said yes because he loved his wife and because her heart was large in a way he sometimes did not deserve. 2 weeks later, Adama returned to Lagos with Chisom sitting beside her in the bus, holding her polythene bag on her lap, watching the world change outside the window with wide, wondering eyes. The Richards home in Lekki Phase 1 was everything Chisom had never seen. A cream-colored gate, a compound swept clean each morning, a sitting room with sofas that felt like clouds. Adama showed her the small room at the back of the house, bought her new clothes, enrolled her in an adult education evening program nearby, and sat with her on her first evening to explain what was expected. You are not my slave, Adama told her plainly. You are under my roof and under my care. You will work, yes, but I will treat you well. In return, I expect honesty and respect. That is all. Chisom nodded and pressed her lips together in a way that looked like gratitude. For the first 3 months, things were fine. Chisom was quick with her hands and eager to please. She cooked reasonably well, kept the rooms tidy, and was always awake before Adama each morning. She was shy around Nathaniel at first, disappearing into the kitchen whenever he came home from work, speaking only when spoken to. But somewhere between the 4th and the 5th month, Chisom began to notice things. She noticed that when Nathaniel came home from work, the house had a particular kind of quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes when two people are politely avoiding a conversation they are both tired of having. She noticed that Nathaniel would eat his dinner quickly, praise the food with something that sounded rehearsed, and retreat to his study. She noticed that Adama would sit in the sitting room long after the television went off, staring at nothing. She noticed the nights when she could hear Nathaniel's voice rising behind the closed bedroom door, controlled and cold, and Adama's voice, patient, steady, never raising, responding. She could never make out the words, but she did not need to. She knew what the argument was about. Children. There were none. 6 years of marriage and no child. Nathaniel's mother had visited twice in the past year, and each visit left Adama looking like she had survived something. She would be quiet for days after, smiling less, moving through the house with an invisible weight on her shoulders. One evening, Chisom heard Nathaniel say it plainly through the thin wall of their bedroom. My family is asking questions, Ada. My brothers, my mother. It has been 6 years. She heard Adama's response, soft, almost inaudible, and then Nathaniel again.
I am not saying it is your fault. I am just saying something has to change. Chisom stood in the hallway holding a glass of water she had gone to fetch and did not move for a long time. Her mind was working. At 21, almost 22 now, she had not yet learned to separate opportunity from cruelty. She had grown up watching women survive by attaching themselves to the right thing at the right time. She looked at the closed bedroom door and she made a decision in her heart that she would not fully admit to herself until much later. She was not a bad girl. She had simply never been taught that some doors must never be opened, no matter how wide they seem to swing. It started with small things. Chisom began waking up earlier to prepare Nathaniel's breakfast before Adama was up. She ironed his shirts with extra care, leaving them hanging in exact the order he wore them, Monday to Friday. When he came home in the evenings looking tired, she made pepper soup without being asked. She started finding reasons to pass through the sitting room while he watched television, lingering briefly, laughing a little too brightly at things he said. Nathaniel noticed. A man always notices, even when he pretends he does not. Adama noticed too, but she told herself it was nothing. Chisom was just growing into herself, becoming more confident, more present. She told herself this because it was easier than the alternative, because Adama Richards was a woman who believed in the basic goodness of people, especially people she had chosen to help. That belief would cost her everything. 6 months after Chisom arrived, Adama traveled to Abuja for a work conference. It was a 3-day trip for her job at the NGO she managed. She kissed Nathaniel goodbye, reminded Chisom about the generator schedule, and left. She would never know exactly what happened during those 3 days. She never asked, and nobody ever told her. But something shifted in that house while she was gone. Some line was crossed that could not be uncrossed, and when she returned, she could feel it without being able to name it. Nathaniel was distant in a new way, different from before. Chisom was quieter. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Adama shook it off. She was good at shaking things off. She had spent years learning how. The affair, because that is what it was, continued in secret for months.
Chisom was careful. She was smarter than anyone had given her credit for. She knew how to be invisible when she needed to be invisible, and present when she needed to be present. She knew that Adama was often the last to see what was in front of her, not because she was foolish, but because she trusted too completely. And Chisom used that trust like a knife. She began telling Nathaniel things. Small things at first, that she had always wanted a real family, that she admired how he provided, that she would give anything to build something with a man like him. She told him this in quiet moments, in corridors, in the kitchen when Adama was not home. She was patient and deliberate, and she placed every word like a stone on a path she was building towards something. When she realized she was pregnant, she did not panic. She smiled. She told Nathaniel on a Tuesday night, standing in the kitchen doorway with a pregnancy test in her hand and her chin raised. She had rehearsed this moment many times. She had decided exactly how her face would look. "It is yours," she said simply. Nathaniel stared at the test. Something crossed his face, something complicated that Chisom could not fully read, but she saw underneath it the thing she had been counting on: hope. Raw, desperate, exhausted hope. The hope of a man who had been told silently by years and empty rooms and a wife who cried alone in the bathroom that maybe fatherhood was not for him. That hope was her weapon, and she used it without flinching. She said, "I will give you a son, but I will not share a house with your wife. You have to choose." Nathaniel looked at her for a long time. He thought about Adama. He thought about 6 years. He thought about his mother's face and his brother's questions and the clinic visits and the herbs and the prayers and the frustration that had slowly been eating him alive. He made the wrong choice. Men often do when they are afraid. Not because they are evil, but because fear will convince you that what you are running toward is better than what you are running from. He went to Adama on a Saturday morning. She was in the kitchen frying plantains, humming a song she always hummed on Saturday mornings. It was an ordinary, beautiful morning, and she was happy in it. And he stood in the doorway watching her for a moment before he spoke. "Ada,
I need to talk to you. She turned with a spatula in her hand, still smiling, and something in his face made the smile slowly leave hers. He sat down at the kitchen table. She turned the gas low and sat across from him. And then he told her all of it. Chisom, the pregnancy, the months he could not account for, and what he wanted now. He spoke in a low, careful voice, like a man reading a prepared statement, and he did not look at her face when he spoke. When he finished, the kitchen was completely silent except for the low sizzle of oil on the pan. Adama did not scream. She did not throw the spatula. She did not collapse onto the floor. She sat very still and looked at her husband's face. This man she had cooked for, prayed for, defended, loved through years of pressure and silence, and she felt the world rearrange itself around her into a shape she did not recognize. "You want me to leave?" she said. It was not a question. Nathaniel finally looked at her. His eyes were red. There was shame in them, she could see that much. But shame, she was learning, was not the same as a change of mind. "I am sorry, Ada." "You are sorry," she repeated slowly, tasting the words. She stood up, turned the gas off entirely, and walked out of the kitchen. She went to their bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed where she had held him through nightmares, where she had whispered prayers into his chest, where she had silently cried on nights when she thought God was not listening to her pleas for a child. She sat there and she let herself feel the full weight of what was happening, and it was the most pain she had ever known in her life. When she finally stood up to begin gathering her things, she walked to the window and looked out into the compound. Chisom was already outside. She was dragging Adama's luggage from the house and stacking it near the gate. Not her own things, Adama's. She had already decided whose home this was. She moved with an efficiency that was almost businesslike, and she did not look up at the window. Adama watched this 21-year-old girl. This child she had rescued from hunger and despair and a polythene bag with nothing in it, packing her luggage outside the home she had built with her own hands. The same girl she had fed, clothed, enrolled in school, called my daughter in front of strangers. She pressed her hand flat against the window glass. A single tear ran down her face. Just one. Because some things are too enormous for tears to do them justice. Ngozi, Adama's best friend, was at her door within 40 minutes of the phone call. Adama had called her without words. She picked the phone, dialed, and when Ngozi answered, all she could manage was a sound. Not a sentence, just a sound. But Ngozi had known Adama for 15 years, and she understood that sound like you understand a language you grew up speaking in your bones. She arrived at the gate with her car engine still running, pulled Adama into her arms right there in the street beside the luggage, and held her so tightly that Adama finally came apart. She cried the way people cry when they have been holding it back for too long. Ugly, shaking, breathless crying. The kind that frightens you because you are not sure when it will end. Ngozi did not say anything. She did not say it will be okay or you are better than this or any of the things people say when they do not know what else to do. She just held her in the middle of that street and let her fall apart completely because she knew her friend needed to fall apart before she could put anything back together. They loaded the luggage into Ngozi's car together. Nathaniel did not come out. His bedroom light was on. Chisom had disappeared back inside, her work done. Ngozi's spare room became Adama's world for the next 4 months. She barely left it for the first 2 weeks. She slept too much and ate too little and stared at the ceiling in the dark and asked God questions nobody can ever fully answer. Not because she expected a response, but because there was nowhere else to put them. Ngozi brought her food and did not make conversation unless Adama started it. She ran interference with phone calls from Nathaniel's mother, who had the audacity to call and try to explain, from relatives who had opinions, from people who had heard things. Ngozi was a wall, quietly, firmly a wall. In the 3rd week, Adama asked for her laptop. She began to write emails, applications, updated her CV. She called contacts she had not spoken to in years. She did not announce what she was doing, but Ngozi saw the change in her eyes. A small, steady light coming back, like a pilot flame catching in the dark. By the 2nd month, she was going out, not often and not far, but she was going. She visited the markets. She sat in a cafe one afternoon with a novel she didn't really read. She let Ngozi drag her to church on a Sunday, and she sat in the pew and did not cry, though her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles whitened. By the 4th month, she had found a flat.
It was small, a one-bedroom in Surulere on the 3rd floor of a building with a window that looked out over a row of mango trees. It smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. She stood in the empty sitting room on the day she got the keys, looked around at the bare walls and the naked floor and the nothing of it all, and felt something unexpected move through her chest. Space. Clean, quiet, uncontested space. Nobody could take this from her. Nobody had a claim on these walls or this floor or this silence. This, at least, was entirely hers. She got a job promotion 3 months into rebuilding, a director-level role with an international development organization that had been watching her work for years. The salary was enough to breathe, then enough to plan, then enough to dream. She bought simple furniture. She planted something small on the windowsill, a sprig of green she watered every morning. She was not happy, not yet, but she was upright. She was moving. And for a woman who had been told, without those exact words, that she was not enough, being upright was an extraordinary thing. In the Richards' home in Lekki, the baby came and it was a boy, just as Chisom had promised. She named him Nathaniel Jr. and she photographed him in every room of the house and placed his photos in frames along the corridor where Adama's photos used to hang. Nathaniel was happy, or he performed happiness well enough to believe it for a while. He registered the boy's birth through a naming ceremony, invited both families. His mother came and held the baby with tears in her eyes. Nobody spoke Adama's name at the naming ceremony. It was as if she had been quietly edited out of the story, a character removed in revision, a space filled in smoothly so you could not tell she had ever been there. Chisom moved through the Richards now, the way a person moves through a place they have always owned. She redecorated, she changed the curtains, those deep burgundy ones Adama had picked from a shop in Victoria Island after trying 17 others, to yellow ones that flooded the sitting room with a brightness Nathaniel found slightly overwhelming, but said nothing about. She rearranged the kitchen until Nathaniel could not find anything. She invited her own family for visits, a younger sister, an aunt, a cousin, and they occupied the guest room with their noise and their luggage and their complete lack of apology for any of it. Nathaniel watched all of this happen slowly, the way you watch weather change through glass. He told himself it was adjustment, new household, new patterns. He told himself he was happy. But there were evenings when he would be in his study, the same study where Adama and he used to talk late into the night about everything from politics to God to the kind of house they would build someday in the village. And the silence would feel wrong. Not peaceful wrong, hollow wrong. The kind of hollow that comes from replacing something real with something that simply makes noise. Chisom was not cruel to him. She cooked, she cared for the baby, she fulfilled the role she had positioned herself for with the same calculation she used to get there. But she did not ask him how his day went the way Adama used to. She did not remember small things, that he did not like his eggs runny, that he needed silence for the first 30 minutes after coming home from work, that his birthday always made him a little sad and he needed someone to sit with him through it, not celebrate loudly at him. There is a difference between a woman who loves you and a woman who wanted your address. Nathaniel was beginning slowly and painfully to learn the difference.
The baby's health was the first real problem. Little Nathaniel Jr. began falling sick with a frequency that worried everyone. The hospital visits multiplied. Doctors mentioned possibilities but said they needed more tests. Chisom dismissed the concerns whenever Nathaniel raised them and became sharp and defensive when he asked too many questions. 2 years passed in this way. Not badly, not exactly. Just a low, airless life of a household where something essential is missing and everyone is pretending not to notice. On a Thursday morning that began like every other Thursday morning, Nathaniel left for work, realized at the junction that he had left a tender document on his bedroom dresser, and turned back. He let himself in quietly. The gateman was dozing. The house was mid-morning still. The baby was presumably napping. He climbed the stairs, went to the bedroom, and found the document exactly where he'd remembered it. He picked it up and was turning to leave when he heard Chisom's voice from inside the room. The door was not fully closed. She was on the phone. Her voice was low but agitated, and she was speaking in a mix of Igbo and English, the way people do when they are trying to be discreet but are too upset to maintain full composure. He should have left. He told himself later many times that he should have simply walked back down those stairs, but something stopped him at the door. Some instinct, not jealousy, not suspicion, just that old animal alertness that had been asleep for 2 years, placed his hand flat on the door frame and his ear toward the gap. The boy is falling sick again and again, and I don't know what to tell his father because I am starting to suspect. Are you hearing me? I am saying I suspect sickle cell. The hospital is asking questions I cannot answer. A pause. The voice on the other end, Chisom's voice rising slightly. You should have told me your blood group before all this happened. If I had known, I would have. That is not the point. The point is that if Nathaniel starts digging, he will find something that does not add up. Because based on his blood group, this kind of result is not possible from him. He cannot give a sickle cell child. Do you understand what I am telling you? The document slipped from Nathaniel's hand. It hit the floor with a flat, sharp sound, and the world stopped. There was complete silence from inside the room. Then the call ended. Nathaniel heard her footsteps cross the room, slow and careful, and the door swung open. Chisom stood in the doorway, in her house dress with her phone still in her hand, and she looked at him. He looked at her. And the space between them was everything she had just said, every word hanging in the air between them like smoke. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nathaniel, I can explain. He bent slowly and picked up the document from the floor. He straightened. He looked at her one more time, at this woman he had thrown away his marriage for, at this girl who had come into his house with nothing and had rearranged everything, and his face was completely still. Not angry, not broken, just still. The stillness of a man who has just discovered that the ground he was standing on was never ground at all. When I come back this evening, I do not want to see you or the child in this house. He walked past her and down the stairs and out the front door without looking back.
He drove back toward the island in silence. No music, no phone calls, no radio. Just the noise of Lagos traffic and his own breathing and the words replaying in his head over and over, relentless, based on his blood group. This kind of result is not possible from him. He was somewhere on 3rd Mainland Bridge when the memory surfaced. It came quietly, the way important things sometimes do, not with fanfare, just with the particular quality of something you have been avoiding for a long time. The fertility clinic on Adiola Odeku. 3 years ago, he and Adama had both gone for tests because the pressure had become unbearable and they needed answers. He remembered sitting in the waiting room while Adama held his hand and pretended to read a magazine. He remembered how the nurse had said the results would be ready in 3 days and that they could come back together to collect them. He remembered that he had gotten busy, a project deadline, a trip to Port Harcourt, and he had told Adama to please go pick them up. He remembered that she had gone. She came back that afternoon and placed the envelope on the dining table and said, "The results are normal. Everything is fine." And he had been so relieved that he had kissed her forehead and opened a bottle of wine and not thought about it again. He had never actually seen the results. He made a U-turn at the next opportunity and drove to Adiola Odeku. The clinic was a calm, beige-painted building with a small garden out front. He went to the reception desk and gave his name. The woman behind the desk checked the records, looked up at him over her glasses, and informed him that his results had been collected by his wife 3 years ago. He said, "I know. I need another copy." It took some time. Paperwork, a doctor's consultation, verification of his identity. He sat in the waiting room alone and stared at the floor tiles and felt a cold calm settle over him that he did not entirely understand. When they finally handed him the sealed envelope, he took it to his car. He sat behind the wheel for a moment with the envelope on his lap. He opened the envelope. He read the results. He read them again. His hands began to shake, not dramatically, just a fine trembling he could not control, like a frequency running through him. He read the section marked with a doctor's handwritten note, which had been there 3 years ago when Adama had read it. The section he had never seen because his wife had come home and told him everything was fine, and he had believed her, and she had carried this alone. The results were unambiguous. Severe oligospermia, borderline azospermia. In plain language, he was functionally sterile. He could not father a child. The probability was negligible. The doctor had written, in careful clinical language, that natural conception was highly unlikely without significant medical intervention. Adama had known.
She had sat in a clinic chair and read that her husband could not give her children, and she had come home and told him everything was fine. She had absorbed that news into herself, taking it quietly and completely into her body like something she swallowed, and she had continued to smile at him and cook for him and hold his hand and let him blame the childlessness on the universe, on God, on fate, on herself. She had let him look at her with that slow, building frustration, and she had never, not once, said, "It is you, Nathaniel. It is you." She had carried his secret in her chest for 3 years so that he would not have to. That also meant that when Chisom had announced her pregnancy and insisted it was Nathaniel's child, Adama had known that was impossible. She had known the baby was not his. She had known the truth when Nathaniel sat across from her on the kitchen table on that Saturday morning and told her to leave. She had said nothing. She had packed her bags, watched her maid stack her luggage at the gate, called on Ngozi and left. She had let him go. Nathaniel dropped the paper into the passenger seat and covered his face with both hands and wept. Not the controlled, dignified kind of weeping that men sometimes allow themselves in private. Real weeping. The kind that comes from the stomach, that makes sound, that shakes the shoulders. He wept for the woman he had dismissed across a kitchen table on a beautiful Saturday morning while she held a spatula and her world was ending. He wept for 6 years of slow frustration he had directed at the wrong person. He wept for the smile he used to say was the first thing he loved about her, a smile he had very deliberately, very stupidly chosen to throw away. He wept until he was empty, and then he sat there empty for a long time. Then he reached for his phone. He called Adama's number. It rang once. Then a recorded voice told him in a polite, unhurried tone that the number you had dialed was not available or had been switched off. He stared at his phone. He tried again. Same voice, same result. He called on Ngozi. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up, and when she heard his voice, the warmth in hers dimmed by several degrees in the way that a room feels when someone opens a cold window. "Nathaniel, Ngozi, please. I need to reach Ada. Her number is not going through." A pause. Long enough to be intentional. "Ada's number will not go through," Ngozi said carefully. "She changed it." "Where is she? Can you give me—" "She moved, Nathaniel." Another pause. He waited. "She left the country almost 2 years ago. She's abroad now." The dashboard clock read 1:47 p.m. He stared at it as if it had said something surprising. "She's married," Ngozi added, and her voice, though not unkind, did not soften the information. "She met someone good. They have a son." A son. Adama had a son. The woman who had silently, patiently been told by the universe and her husband and the maid she had brought from the village that she was not enough. That woman was now abroad, and she was married to someone who must have seen clearly what Nathaniel had only understood today in a clinic car park. And she had a son. "Nathaniel," his voice had the quality of something stripped bare. "Don't, Nathaniel," she said quietly. "Just don't. I need to tell her something, please. I just need her to know." "She knows, Nathaniel. She knew everything 3 years before you did. She knew, and she chose to let you live with your dignity instead of your truth. That is who she is. That is the woman you sent away."
He said nothing. "She is happy," Ngozi said, and this time her voice was soft, not comforting, just honest. "She is finally, actually happy. Please don't disturb that." The line went quiet. Then he heard a soft click and the call was over. He sat in the car outside the clinic for a long time. Nathaniel Richards sat in his car with a medical result on the passenger seat and the echo of Ngozi's words filling the small, quiet space of the interior, and he tried to locate something to hold on to, But there was nothing. He had taken apart everything that mattered with his own hands, brick by careful brick. And now he was standing in the rubble looking for a room that no longer existed. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the headrest. From somewhere deep in his chest, where he had not gone in a long time, something shifted, a final, settling grief, the kind you carry because it will not go away, but because you have earned it. Some women love so deeply, they carry your shame for you. Nathaniel drove home that evening to an empty house. Chisom had indeed gone. She had called her family, packed the baby's things, and was at her aunt's house in Mushin before dark. She would try to reach Nathaniel many times over the following weeks. He would not always answer. He hired help to run the house. He went back to work. He performed the ordinary acts of a man continuing to live. And from the aunt's side, things looked functional enough. He ate, he slept, he attended meetings and signed documents, and drove through Lagos traffic and said good morning to his office colleagues. But something had gone out of him. He thought about her often. Not always with guilt. Guilt was part of it, yes, but not all of it. He thought about her the way you think about a place you loved and left carelessly and can never go back to. He could not recover from this mistake. He knew that. Ngozi had said it plainly, and she was right. There are some mistakes that do not offer you recovery. Not because life is cruel, but because some things simply cannot be undone. Not by apology, not by intention, not by how thoroughly you come to understand what you have lost. You simply have to carry the understanding and keep walking, one foot and then the other, through all the days that will come. So that is what he did. There is a kind of woman this world does not fully see until she is gone. She is the woman in the kitchen who asks about your day before you ask about hers. She is the woman who reads the bad news and puts the letter in a drawer because she cannot bear to be the reason you cry tonight. She is the woman who stands at the window and watches a young girl she rescued stack her luggage at the gate, and she does not scream. Not because she cannot feel it, but because she already understands, at a depth the screaming would not reach, that this place was never worthy of her anyway. She is the woman who lives quietly and finds everything when she does. For every woman who was told she was not enough, you were always more than enough. You were just in the wrong room.